It will endeavor to grow, to gain ground, attract to itself and acquire ascendancy, not owing to any morality or immorality, but because it lives, because life is precisely will to power. The will to power is one of the most famous concepts in Nietzsche's philosophy. In Beyond Good and Evil, Nietzsche gives the first more or less systematic account of this elusive and notorious concept. This video will focus on the will to power as it appears in Beyond Good and Evil. Nietzsche will develop the concept more in subsequent books. If you want to see an entire video devoted to the will to power, please let us know in the comments below. For now, let's explore the will to power as it appears in Beyond Good and Evil. This is part 2 in a planned 3-part series on Nietzsche's Beyond Good and Evil. If you haven't watched part 1 yet, we highly recommend you watch it first. In that first video, we explore the concept of the philosophical prejudice. Nietzsche's argument is that philosophers are not, in reality, the noble, objective seekers of truth they want you to believe they are. They are not motivated by a will to truth, but by a will to power. As such, the philosophy of each philosopher is a product not of an objective search for the truth, but a reflection of the personality of the philosopher himself. The rigid, boring Kant, for example, who followed the exact same daily routine every day and who never left his hometown, thus produced a rigid, boring philosophy based on duty and obligations. Spinoza developed a rational philosophical system with mathematical precision to compensate for his own frail and weak character. Schopenhauer, the pessimist, sought to create a philosophy in which denial of the world was the highest good. But what is the will to power exactly? Nietzsche does not simply mean political or military power, although that's certainly a part of it. Nietzsche believes that the primary drive of organisms is a thirst for power. He contrasts this to the biology and Schopenhauerian philosophy of the day, which held that the will to life, the will to self-preservation, was the primary motivation of living beings. Physiologists should bethink themselves before putting down the instinct of self-preservation as the cardinal instinct of organic being. A living thing seeks above all to discharge its strength. Life itself is will to power. Self-preservation is only one of the indirect and most frequent results thereof. The philosopher is a sneaky creature. He does not seek political or military power, but a power of a different kind. Spiritual power. Power over knowledge and truth. Truth is not the end objective, but power is. Hopefully, this clears up the misconception that some people have, that when speaking of power, Nietzsche would mean political or military power. This is simply not the case. Nietzsche uses the concept of power in a very broad sense. He even invites the reader to make a thought experiment. Could the will to power be sufficient to explain our world? Supposing that nothing else is given as real, but our world of desires and passions, that we cannot sink or rise to any other reality, but just that of our impulses. Are we not permitted to make the attempt and to ask the question whether this which is given does not suffice for the understanding even of the so-called mechanical or material world? The world seen from within, the world defined and designated according to its intelligible character. It would simply be will to power and nothing else. The world seen from within. The world as will to power and nothing besides. What would that look like? Nietzsche gives us an example. In the ordinary, scientific explanation of the world, when an organism is digesting food, the process is explained by a network of causal relationships. Stomach acid breaks down the food, the nutrients of which then get absorbed into the bloodstream, and which are then used in a variety of processes in the brain and other organs of the body. This process of digestion is causal. The rabbit eats a carrot, and in consequence, the rabbit gets the nutrients which allow it to stay alive. This is scientific thinking. B follows from A because A is at the cause of B. The scientific method seeks to find and explain these processes of causality. In the proposed thought experiment by Nietzsche, we are invited to look at the world through a different lens. Try and forget the scientific thinking and causality. We are entering the world of will to power. In Nietzsche's conception of the will, what happens when we digest food is that our desire for nourishment is greater than the desire of the food to remain undigested. Ultimately, this boils down to a battle of wills. Our desire for nourishment is fundamentally a form of will to power because we gain power by being alive and nourished. However, our food also stands to gain power by remaining undigested. What happens in the process of eating and nourishment is not a scientific, if this, then that causality, but a battle of wills in which we impose our will to power upon something else. And if we successfully digest the food, we have won that battle. We have dominated. The will to power of the rabbit dominates the will to power of the carrot, and thus the carrot gets digested, absorbed by the rabbit. The carrot has lost the battle. Its will was too weak. Granted, finally, that we succeeded in explaining our entire instinctive life as the development and ramification of one fundamental form of will, namely the will to power, as my thesis puts it. Granted that all organic functions could be traced back to this will to power, and that the solution of the problem of generation and nutrition, it is one problem, could also be found therein. One would thus have acquired the right to define all active life force unequivocally as will to power. In this Nietzschean view, the entire world is a world of struggle and thirst for power, even the insignificant or innocent process of digestion. In this thought experiment, Nietzsche invites us to look at the world through the lens of competing wills. In later books, most notably Twilight of the Idols, Nietzsche seems to have taken this thought experiment one step further. Whereas in Beyond Good and Evil, he talks about this in a conditional sense. If this is true, in Twilight of the Idols, he seems to really believe in its actual reality. If you'd like to see us deal with the will to power in more detail throughout Nietzsche's other works, please leave a comment below. It helps me to know what you guys want to see. Anyway, at this point in Nietzsche's intellectual development, the thesis of the world as will to power remains a thought experiment and not an actual hypothesis. He still maintains, however, that we are mistaken when we believe that philosophers are motivated by a will to truth and not by a will to power. And the same is true of ourselves. Nietzsche's overarching point in Beyond Good and Evil is that we delude ourselves into thinking we desire truth above all else, when it is actually power which we desire. Thus, when thinking up explanations for the world, or when doing philosophy, we will prefer an explanation that fits our personality over an explanation that approaches objective truth, for the simple reason that a philosophy that suits our needs will increase our power. This happens whether we realize it, or whether we want to, or not. The search for truth is not like a treasure hunt, where one day we stumble upon the buried treasure in the sand. The search for truth is like a war, a battle, a fight. We do not want to find the truth, we want to conquer it. As such, we will employ the tools to best win the battle, the tools that suit our purposes, not the purposes of the truth itself. One person might fight with his fists. Another will prefer a sword. In the same way, a philosopher chooses the philosophy that suits him best and will then proclaim to the world he has found objective truth. This is the essence of Nietzsche's perspectivism, the idea that there is no objective truth, but only different perspectives. Perspectivism makes sense in Nietzsche's proposed view of the world as competing drives. The philosophy that wins the great battle for truth will not necessarily be the sign of truth of winning over falsehood. It will simply be a sign of the times. For example, a life-denying philosophy, like that of Schopenhauer, or Christianity, will not be the sign of a society approaching the truth of the world, but it will be a sign of a society in decay, a society that hates life, a society that hates the material world and seeks to negate it, a decadent society. We will discuss Nietzsche's concept of decadence and his treatment of Christianity and slave morality in the next video in this series. If you want to be notified when that video comes out, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell button. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in part 3 on Nietzsche's Beyond Good and Evil.